Greetings and welcome to Liminal Light, a show that explores the languages of myth and lore, sky and star, earth and embodiment through astrology, art, and spirit engagement. I'm your host, Chris. Enjoy. Okay, so for November, we're going to do things a little different. I have a variety of format and technical changes I'm experimenting with for the show. So this round, we are going to do the forecast as its own thing, and then roll out the guest interview and the herbal talk, etc. in the next few weeks. So without further ado, the astrology of November 2018. She twists around and around and around and around again, spiraling downstairs in reflection to levels on the opposite end of the spectrum, the inversion of her twirling descent into the double helix of polarities, upsetting punch bowls as she goes. The splash of pomegranate and plum splatters the cool canvas, and another work of art is made, fetching high bids at the auction whose proceeds filter into cultural coffers. What once emerged goes down, and what goes down is bound to come back up, seeking again the light of sparkling flashbulbs and glimmering gowns, chiming chords, cascading notes and shimmering chatter, clinking glasses. In her dizzy state, she is unsure if she keeps the book of etiquette balanced on her head, but if only she can reach the dancing pole within the pinch point of the pivot, she can swing herself around with enough potential to secure accessories to her ensemble as she floats across the dance floor, dashing with decorum. Our heads may spin from such maneuvers, though really it is the world that must reel around us as we pause in the pinnacle of our pleasure and stand straight for a moment to recite to ourselves the recipe of most realized desire. Piano keys tap and plunge toward the bottom board and then spring back up for more manipulation. The melodies lobbed by the rising seesaw vault over the hairdos and hats and headdresses in perfumed silence, until they hit the wall and decorate the hall with sonorous reflections that drizzle down the glass and weep like mirthful clowns. We know not how to help them. They laugh and cry and juggle wine bottles, and it's so spectacular that we watch and wish we could have the coordination to balance our desires so nimbly. A hush comes over the crowd for a second, their masks trampled beneath their feet. The hostess enters the party. Embarrassed, the guests reach for the one they wore, but it was lost in the shuffle, so they apply someone else's to their face. She plucks us from the crowd and politely asks her to join her in another chamber. She needs our assistance. It's for the sake of the whole party. We find a room full of weights and balances on strings, suspended statues of various shapes depicting musical instruments, sports equipment, art supplies, natural objects, and various other charms and ephemera. She says the party is all off. It's likely to careen into a regrettable affair, and we need to reset the parameters. We pull a brass clarinet, and the record starts skipping. People laugh and jeer. No, that's not right. We let it slide back up to its previous position. We gently tug a painter's palette, and the light dims and candles ignite, incepting a romantic mood. Carts of ripe fruit are wheeled out. A swan glides down the fountain. Yes, that's nice. We reach for a pair of silver scissors, but they retract and escape our hand. We look to the hostess and she smiles. She lets her hair down, slips a slender flute out of her bosom, and plays a few sonorous notes. The scissors descend smoothly to her palm. The tempo decreases and the mood grows calm. Dancers pull their partners closer for a slow dance cheek to cheek. We pull a brass oar and waiters begin to shuck oysters. She sets a laurel crown swaying and champagne is poured. We spin a carved crane and toasts are proposed. People clap and friendship in accord. We've done it. When we return to the hall, the trampled masks have become balloons and bouquets, floral and festive. The piano keys roll like a gentle breeze, dropping in their slots like summer rain. The warmth of the candles caress our temples and kiss our lips. The swan throws its head back in delight as its mate emerges from the water. Balance has been restored, but this is not so simple. The ball concludes and we amble to our carriages. spending the ride home wondering how our lives can go on as they have with our new sense of balance. We've got a new way to walk, and it's the way we should have walked all along, the parts of our feet hitting the ground in the right order. We've got to pull out our artist statements and make some revisions. We light a crackling fire and pour some brandy and pace around our study, reviewing the paragraphs we once wrote. Some paragraphs get circled, some sentences get underlined, but other whole pages go into the fire and burn with brightening hearts, our chests thumping excitedly as we come to the core part, the subtext of our mission statement, the holy grail we thought we sought, which now we know to achieve such ideals only comes after we integrate our recent revelations. We scrawl quick sets of script and insert them in, sheaf by sheaf. By morning our patrons might not recognize us, but never matter. This is not for a pittance, this is for a higher purpose. The fire fetches the gold flecks embedded in our eyes and rarefies the retinas. Who regard the world with wonder. The brandy pours a river to our heart and circulates new bravado through our ventricles. Our pulse quickens, and we leap to the table. We call in our comrades. We run to the windows and call out into the night. The town awakens and comes running, ready to receive the shower of leaflets we have composed. Join up, sign here, all aboard, off we go. We collapse onto the carpet, overexcited, needing rest. Sleep takes hold, but in dream we're molded like clay, our subconscious hard at work forming us, our psyche, into the image of an ideal self we now know. This is emotionally exhausting, and we require baths and broths and balms along the way. The massage bruises us, grasping deep tissue and squeezing it into shape, but with every wince and tick and jerk and twitch and flash of cold milk that splashes our eyes like a soft blindfold to help us gaze upon the grail for which we work towards, we become more motivated, and the engine purrs, the beast acknowledges the strap, the doors open, and we are able to see the expanse before us, the wide world, the potential for anything, abroad anywhere into which we may let fly our arrows. The thought shakes us, and with a cheerful heart, we leave home, shedding bittersweet tears. The month opens with Venus having moved backwards into rulership in Libra from detriment in Scorpio, opposing Uranus and Taurus on her way over the threshold. We are returning from the territory of raw lusts, down and dirty pleasures, carnal delights, and grimy aesthetics, to a place of equilibrium and balance. And even though light and darkness here can be arranged in attractive chiaroscuro, the settings on the contrasts might be unexpectedly varied for the first few weeks as we get the settings back to a level we like. Here the passions we reacquainted with throughout Scorpio are placed within context and brought to balance in our life, but this can't occur without temporary swinging things out of stability. Having her in Libra means we are seeking balance rather than discord, but we might wrestle with extremes until the settings are secure. Very early Friday, November 2nd at 2 a.m., the Sun progresses into Scorpio's second decan, where we will identify with intense intimacy and orient ourselves for deep engagement. As the light of the day lessens, we shack up for someone to share the nighttime hours with, whether this is metaphorical or literal. By November 6th, the Sun trines Neptune in Pisces, and these intentions toward ravishing rendezvous, vigorous connections, sounding dives, and soul spelunkings harmonize with needs for mystical philosophies and unhindered psychological expansion. We find the moon passing over retrograde Venus here, where the need to return into equilibrium of pleasure and attraction flows with our tender moods. The moon being in just the right place to open our emotions to the space weather is a theme throughout the month, so intellect and spirit and emotion is likely to weave and cross and mingle throughout, widening our emotional spectrum, rendering us excitable and inspired at times, and at others overwhelmed and washed in wild waters. By 9 a.m. on Friday, Uranus retrogrades back into Aries. The final invocations and radicalizations to hot rodder identities will occur from here until next spring, referencing the culmination of a process completed by last May and taking place over the past 7 years. We might ask who we had become by May 2018, and what final mods must be made now to complete the process and apply the final touches. It's as if the independent self we've been driving around with since the spring was merely a prototype, and now that it's been crash-tested throughout a turbulent Mars retrograde sequence, we can roll it back into the garage, make the necessary final chops, and weld it together permanently. In this mode, Uranus will wait to oppose Venus again when she crosses back into Scorpio next month, and we can face our radicalized identity up against our new equilibrium of love, desire, and passion. A new moon in Scorpio occurs Wednesday, November 7th at 11 a.m., and these themes of intimacy and intensity sow seeds invisibly, incepting a new process of manifestation. Interesting that this occurs at the degree of the star Zubin el-Ganubi, a star that was once considered part of Scorpio's claws, but is now Libra's scales. The star is a connotation of civic duty and social justice, of the interests of the group over the individual. The sun visits this degree on this day each year, and this year in particular it coincides with ballot casts. Activity surrounding this star has been mentioned to portend the sacrifice of leaders, and indeed it falls only 2 days after Guy Fawkes Day, when effigies are burnt of Guy to celebrate the fumbled gunpowder plot, which would have killed the King of England, but ties to an earlier rite at this time where fetishes representing the old ills and negative influences of the previous year were cast into the flames to be consumed and destroyed. There's obvious magical potential here. Jupiter magnificently rolls into rulership in Sagittarius at 7 a.m. on Thursday, November 8th, and brings with him enthusiasm around ideals, philosophies, and the motivation to embark on missions and set out on quests to find promised lands and win holy grails. Opportunities may abound for the next 13 months, which is much needed after the rough ride of the past summer, and the influx of optimism incites exploration as we will seek to expand our horizons and engage our wanderlust, likely enticing others to join the caravan as we travel. There will be much to say of this over the course of the year, and we will fill our cups to the brim with it right off the bat as the moon follows Jupiter into his domicile and conjoins with him by 2 p.m. that afternoon. We need this optimism. We feel ready to see the big picture and want to race toward ideal places, people and things, no matter how far they may seem. It's all part of a mood for adventure, which stirs our spirits as well as our moods. Boasting and toasting is likely to ensue, as well as big-sounding plans being inflated. Jupiter enters rulership exiting from tense territory, having crawled from Scorpio's watery depths in a grand trine with both Chiron and the North Node, making for a coherence of or looking on the bright side of various addictions, vampirisms, traumas, old wounds, sore spots, imbalances, hard hungers, insatiable thirst, and so on, from which he escapes into kindled inspirations and optimistic trajectories. In the morning on Friday, November 9th, Mercury enters the second phase of Sagittarius, a place he has lost dignity considerably and which he faces his detriment fully. Here it is hard for him to sort the details under the glare of the big picture. Belongings get hopelessly jostled and lost while you make the mad dash drive from coast to coast, no matter how hard you try to keep the car organized. Things get overlooked. Mercury strains to keep up with all the details a big venture like this requires, and tends to mix up the facts for the hopes and leaps of faith. The moon ushers him into this space, and we feel emphatic to his confusion. Our own excited emotions become hard to sort. By 10:15 a.m., Mars trines Venus, and an octave of sexual stimulation resonates across the ecliptic. This creative energy is focused on doing what it must to see its conceptual projections brought into manifestation, no matter how much that requires a reversion of polarities, and which is nice or acceptable. Right is left and dark is light and up is down is perfectly fine when operated by the avant-garde. Over the next few days, the sun slips into the third decan of Scorpio on November 12th and comes to know what the ongoing need for pleasure drives us to do. This is a place that sees the world from a vampire's eyes and is not uncommon to nymphomaniacs and drug addicts. The actions we carry out here are not necessarily that depraved, but as this decan is ruled by the moon in one system and Venus in another and extends into Saturn's bounds, it is here we might stalk the streets continually until we encounter what we want. Once you've tasted it, you can't live without it, Having clear understanding of that which we would rather not be deprived of in life is integral to assuring that we can set up our lives in such a way that they be continually satisfying. The Sun here sees this raw reality and accepts it. Mars leaves Aquarius' abstractions and plunges into Pisces' ambient expanses on Thursday, November 15th at 5:30 p.m., where his normally direct nature dilates in focus to encompass the whole. This might be considered homeopathy versus allopathy in tactics, where action takes on a much more holistic approach. Applied energy diffuses into the amorphous total of the system. Here the high seas of intuition, emotion, and imagination are found, a place which engenders compassion. So this Mars, though sometimes feeling like confrontation comes from everywhere out of nowhere simultaneously, can sync up to more subtle tides and use natural currents to attack what he must more non-violently. Having Jupiter in rulership in Sagittarius likely means this is a much more inspired Zen warrior or physical artist rather than the paranoid soldier on acid, a fate we were scantly saved from considering Jupiter's very recent ingress. Again, the moon catches up and conjoins Mars here, so what we must do with energy in intuitive and watery Pisces, we feel a need for and have emotions about. We might find ourselves needing to do energy work or to simply approach a challenge intuitively and just follow our gut and wing it. Interestingly, Venus stations direct not long after at 7 p.m., and all of our tastes, our likes and dislikes, our composure, what we value, our social poise and artistic grace is brought finally back into balance. This is perfect poetry, new inspirations kindled, a new sense of adventure, an orientation to what we can't live without, and a willingness to work with available energy and act intuitively are all in the air as we find our center and seek our new cultural meaning and begin bonding with our desires. Mercury stations retrograde the next day at 7 p.m. on Friday, November 16th, in detriment, square Neptune, while Neptune is conjoined by the moon. It appears the cocktail previously mentioned was enough to have our head spinning, even if it's positive, which it likely is, as Jupiter's in rulership and is presiding over Mercury's retrograde, as well as Neptune's alarming influence. This is certainly a rewriting, editing, and reformatting of our language and logic surrounding opinions and ideals at the heart of our mission, and how we organize and consolidate our resources and forces toward our goals and our true purpose. And all of this getting hopelessly washed in abundance of dreams and imaginations and fantasies, although this is only natural in the wake of so much revelation and eruptions of so much inspiration. We are expanding our trajectories and realizing core factors about what we want. As this is the case, we must whip out the plan we had previously drafted to do a major editorial sweep, not just adjusting the details, but pouring in illustrations and setting it to music, and choreographing dancers. This is no longer a rational approach, but one that is an open system, where the facts are just facets of a fractal that is permeated with spirits and great mysteries. As we take everything out of our travel sack and clean it off, and then decide what goes back in and what gets pushed aside, we take the time to carry out an urgent subfumigation and consecration of the items, and allow into the array both power objects and haunted materials, plant allies, and familiar spirits. Mars squares Jupiter on Monday, November 19th at 8 p.m., and again, even though a hard aspect traditionally, Jupiter in rulership with Mars and Jupiter's domicile likely renders this square a productive tension and a motivational energy where luck, wisdom, and insight make itchy mystical tactics and universal confrontation. This is probably us revving up to engage with our passions after they have been filtered and processed the past 13 months while Jupiter was in Scorpio and are clean and ready to fuel our engines and lubricate our movements as we strive for more spiritual ideals. Mars nears Fomalhaut here, which feeds him with the light of mystical poetry. The following day, November 20th, the Sun steps into the grand trine with Rahu in Cancer and Chiron in Pisces, and visions of addiction and need to let go, pains, and insatiable thirst for resources harmonize on the more subtle end of the spectrum. Watch out here for foreshadowings of the Capricorn-Cancer eclipse series. The moon sails through exaltation in Taurus, now temporarily free of Uranus, so capture all that must be carried to get you through the next 7 years of Uranus destabilizing the bull's sign. The Sun ingresses Sagittarius on Thursday, November 22nd at 4 a.m., and is now ready to join Jupiter in focusing on questing, getting out there and taking the show on the road. Here the Sun sets his sights on an ideal and how we might move towards it. Jupiter, only a few degrees away, can feel his beams quite acutely now, much of this hot air catching fire and burning off. In the small hours of November 23rd, the moon reaches fullness in Gemini at 2 a.m. Luna happened to catch most of the action front and center on her way to most light, so it is fitting that she glows brightest in the sign of exploding, blooming curiosity, blossoming information, many perspectives, fermentic communications, and multiplicity of ideas. There's a lot to investigate, and chatter brims with an excited buzz. Mercury, Gemini's ruler, makes his way back into Sagittarius' first decan by 7 a.m., where the core opinions of the whole mission are under review. All this talk and influx of new information might have us calibrating our aim at a slightly different target, and perhaps one in the entirely opposite direction. Hunters take notice. A few days later, on Monday, November 26th, at 2 a.m., Jupiter and the Sun reach Cazimi, and the greater benefic finds himself in the Sun's heart, purified, centralized, stabilized. Objectives and aims are honed in and realized. We know exactly here what our targets are and what philosophies hold true. Our spiritual inspirations are pure, our quests are holy. This happens once a year, but when it occurs in Jupiter's rulership, it is an auspicious moment that only happens under twice a decade. Look deeply into this bright moment of night and see what kinds of inspired pathways it illuminates before you. Mars squares Mercury only an hour later from Jupiter's watery domicile to his fiery, and the two facets of Jupiter's extended action, Mars's intuitive and mystically inspired energy work tactics, and Mercury's editing of ideal principles, pulse with motivating urgency. Only 1 day later, Mercury joins the Sun for an inferior conjunction, the moment when Hermes hands messages up to us to read from the depths of materiality and undercurrents of manifestation, revealing things to the hidden layers beneath, in this case, things he found while going back over all of the drafts of our mission statement and reworking them. Details we might have forgotten about could get remembered here. Later that day, Mars sextiles Saturn at 4 p.m., bringing a twinge of earthy practicality back into the picture, as our energies have been revving with spiritual fire, our emotions have been sloshing around in our tanks, and our thoughts flying high for bird's-eye views. A minor Saturn aspect reminds us that there are practicalities to consider, but Mars's improvised approach to action means he is willing to work with whatever demands the territory presents, and so Saturn presents no problem, maybe just a firming agent to remind that our wild rockets will eventually have to prove they can also safely land on the ground. Mercury conjoins Jupiter on an hour and a half later, and likely hands in the report from Saturn's remedial test to the Lord of the House, who is naturally optimistic about the results and integrates the details into the context of the big picture. Venus steps onto the bends of the nodes around noon on Wednesday, November 28th, nearing an opposition with Uranus she accomplishes on the 30th. We might come to see what resolved and concluded and how our creative and romantic equilibriums were restored still must be put in perspective with the radicalizations and revolutions to our identities and individuality, and this is something that is more than likely going to play into the shifts that the next eclipse series will bring over the coming year and a half, with the nodes having moved into Cancer and Capricorn. Many changes have been made. We've learned valuable lessons about how we use energy. We see the road we must take glowing before us. Our tastes have grown nuanced. We've remembered desires we had been suppressing, and certain parts of ourselves have been modified for increased power. All of this has bearing on what territory we decide to let go of and what we choose to nurture and grow in the coming months.